Nastasia, thank you for the introduction to PIPC 2025. PASA, what a privilege to be here as part of this opening event. I'd like to talk to you about a world that has gone upside down, and our task, our challenge is to make sense of it. Where to start? In 1873, Lewis Carroll produces a book called Through the Looking Glass. And a looking glass is an old-fashioned word for a mirror, and the mirror shows us the world backwards. And in this fantastical story, a young girl, Alice, goes through the looking glass and finds, to her amazement, surprise, that on the other side of the looking glass, the world is truly upside down and back to front. And when you go into Lewis Carroll's fantasy world, these are the rules of engagement. Time goes backwards, so you remember things before they happen. Think about that for a moment. And the queen, who is one of the characters on the other side of the looking glass, her finger starts to bleed because she is going to sew, and when she sews, she is going to prick herself with a needle. That's what happens when time goes backwards. Up is down is up. Logic bends. Words take on any meaning the speaker chooses. That's what happens through the looking glass. And I happened to pick up this book at the beginning of this year, and what a wonderful coincidence, what fantastic serendipity, because although this is written 150 years ago, it could have been written as an op-ed about 2025. We are through the looking glass. Things have shifted spectacularly, and it would seem that the rules of engagement have changed. Some for instances, over the course of the last 18 months, the political change has been spectacular. Politics is not my platform. We'll give that to justice. But we can't possibly have a conversation about context without a consideration of the way in which the world has changed over the last 18 months. Claudia Sheinbaum, a Jewish woman, is elected as head of state in Mexico, a conservative Catholic society. Botswana changes its government after 58 years. They say, enough of that, we'll have a new party. South Africa votes in a government of national unity to displace 30 years of rule. Macron calls a snap election. He gets snapped to a fresh reality. India, Modi can't form a government. He needs a coalition. Of course, November is the big story. On the way to November, we have Labour replacing the Conservatives in the UK. In November, we get the Republicans displacing the Democrats. And the rule then of 2024 and into 2024 has been that of displacement. There's two big headlines from this. The first is that whilst more people went to the polls than any year in history, democracy held. In other words, there was institutional integrity. That's a powerful statement. But inside of that institutional integrity, it facilitated this change and transition. If I haven't convinced you yet that the world is very, very different, Takaichi Sainai is recently appointed as head of the LDP in Japan. A hierarchical, male-dominated society has said, enough of that. We want a female head of state. The world has gone upside down. We are through the looking glass. Once we're through the looking glass, it doesn't change the fact that we remain human. And human, Our desire, our great ambition is to figure out what's coming at us. Let's figure out what the future looks like. And so we then dedicate our time to forecasting. This is a dangerous activity. And here, although I've just got some anecdotal evidence, just take these as cameos of the last 6 years, 2020, 21, 22, etc., through to 2026. And each of them is, imagine if I'd put this card in front of you in January of that year and said to you in January 2020, the word for the year is COVID, followed by lockdown. And that might have had some mouth moving and, what do you mean, never heard of this? And we sit on the cusp of one of the biggest industrial disruptions of recent times, but in no one's strategy, plan, or playbook. 21 delivers double-digit inflation, last seen in the 1980s. Again, not in strategy playbooks. 22 delivers Russia-Ukraine. The oil price goes from $60 to $120. 23 brings GPT. 24, the political arrangement. 25, we're not done yet, but if on a Friday afternoon you can decide that 100% tariffs is a good idea, then maybe that will be the word of 2025, beginning with a T. And if you're still not convinced that we can't forecast, imagine if I told you this. Bafana Bafana. 2026. And maybe we'll get more than the one goal. So I think the question through the looking glass isn't what does the future look like? The question through the looking glass is how do we build enterprises, societies, countries, cities that thrive? Fortunately, there are some things that we can grab onto because disruption, there's nothing new about disruption. Think of 89, Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, or the introduction of information technologies from the 1990s into the 2000s and how that has spectacularly changed the world. And over this long sweep of persistent disruption, we've been involved in a study which asks, what is the single biggest driver of business performance? Hold your breath. It's not leadership. It's not your brand. It's not the industry you operate in. The single biggest driver of business performance in our 2,500 company study that covers more than 20 years finds that it is economic growth that is the single biggest driver. If you want a fantastic business year, wish first for economic growth. It explains more than half of companies' revenue growth across industries, across countries, and across time, and it explains more than half of companies' earnings performance across industries, across countries, across time. And so if economic growth matters so much, what then causes growth? And here is a second big piece of work that I've been involved in over the last 15 years, trying to answer this simple but really important question. What are the things that cause countries to transition through elevated, inclusive, and sustained economic growth? Deng Xiaoping says, drop all of your assumptions and just ask for the evidence. What is it that causes elevated, transformative growth? And in this work, in a study of 160 countries, 60 years of data, 1,200 line items per country, and what those line items include is everything from number of nurses per 1,000 population to kilometers of tarred road. So you've got this fantastic buffet of things that might be responsible for transforming country performance. And using big data, we ask that simple question, give us the answer. What are the things that transition and transform? Just 6. Elevated savings and investment. How much? 25% of GDP and more. Demography, babies matter. You want more people coming into the workforce than going into retirement. Stable policies and capable institutions. Education and healthcare needs little elaboration. And then openness. No country has become prosperous by building walls. News to the world. If we gather together those 6 ingredients and then weight them, one of them carries half of the explanatory weight, and it's savings and investment. This is the single biggest explainer of economic performance. And the relationship that you see here, on the left-hand side, you've got the relationship between saving and investment. If you want investment, you must first save. No country has retailed its way to prosperity. You save, that feeds investment, and then the flywheel can feed the retail element. And on the right-hand side, you have the relationship between investment and economic growth. If we map South Africa on this scorecard, the results are disappointing. The words you never want to hear at home. You can deal with, I'm angry. I'm disappointed. That's a different conversation. South Africa's savings investment rate is just 15% of GDP, a far cry from the 25% that is required. And if we put that into the structural growth model, it translates into approximately 0% economic growth in per capita income terms. South Africa is stuck. Not to be too grim about it, notice the dark greens are our neighborhood. And this speaks to the center of world economic gravity shifting increasingly leftward, rightward, and downward, as opposed to the historical leftward and northward dominance. So the world center of economic gravity is steadily shifting, and that has important implications for the businesses that we build through the looking glass, whether it is payments or some other rail that facilitates your direction of travel in business and industry. So what's the call to action in this room? I think the call to action is to facilitate not banks, but banking, to overdo the one-liner. It's banking that we need, not banks. It's the service we need, rather than the bricks and mortar. But banking is not a bank account. What we are in search of is financial inclusion, because it's financial inclusion that facilitates the ability to save, the ability to invest. And so through the looking glass, if we're going to build a thriving world, and all of the ingredients necessary to build that architecture and infrastructure, the architects are in this room, the engineers are in this room. This is our work to build thriving societies. So 3 pieces of evidence to close my thoughts on this. The first is the importance of financial inclusion. Here's data from a couple of studies. 63 countries, 35 years of study, and they find that the single ingredient, financial inclusion, explains 1/4 of economic growth. So if your business wants to do well, and if economic growth matters, then 1/4 of the question is answered by, does the society have financial inclusion? 80 countries over 40 years, every 10% improvement in financial inclusion measured by credit as a percentage of GDP, every 10% improvement led to a plus 0.7 economic growth. In other words, you would lift South Africa's average of the last 15 years of 1% economic growth to 1.7. You want to get it to 2.4? Don't lift financial inclusion by 10%, lift it by 20. And this room would lift South Africa from 1% to 2.5% economic growth. And in 91 less developed countries over 14 years, financial inclusion lifts economic growth by 1.5%. The second is it translates into business performance. That electronic payments added 300 billion to GDP in 70 countries per annum, 27 countries, 10% increase in payments increases productivity. And in a suite of countries, India, Kenya, LATAM, interoperable digital rails reduces working capital by 5 to 10 days and improves revenue performance by a similar 5 to 10%. You've got the magic button. And then to close with this observation, of course, all of this is more than just a bank account. And to play the game, imagine if I took these things away. If I take away your bank account, that's one thing. But if I take away your access to credit, if I take away your access to insurance, short-term insurance, long-term insurance. I spent a little bit of time in Toronto, Canada, where I had a visiting professorship. And in the 3 years that I was there, I tried to get insurance on a vehicle. And I learned what it was like to be outside the system, unable to access insurance because they didn't believe me. They didn't believe my numbers. I was the other. And a company called Zolve is trying to solve this by picking up your data and moving it with you and giving that information to financial services businesses in other places to integrate you into the system and create facilitation and financial inclusion. So I'll start with an old author. Let me finish with an old author to go to the classic. Charles Dickens says, "Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron and gold, thorns or flowers that would never have bound you, but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day." This is the link that binds us. I applaud you and I wish you well and I urge you to purpose through payments, inclusion, financial facilitation. Thank you for your time.